you think it's appropriate to leave the state, not tell your direct supervisor, I'm out of state, but I'm going to be working.
But then on Sunday, you don't show up, but you put in for 4 hours.
I mean, if I'm guilty of anything in this regard, I'm guilty of working too much.
But you think it's proper, for the record, we're on tape, you think it's proper to put in that you work 2 days at holiday pay and not even here.
Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Today, I have an interrogation of former police officer, former Lieutenant Jason Swartout, and he was a lieutenant at the Blue Ash, Ohio Police Department. This interrogation takes place on January 9th, 2024, and this investigation stems from the previous months where they are alleging that Lieutenant Swartout was stealing and lying from the police department to the police department for several months. And what he was caught doing was showing up to work, clocking in, and then going home and using the excuse, oh, I'm working for home. This lieutenant was so brazen to do this. He was even turning in time while he was on vacation, on Thanksgiving, out of state, in the hospital. It's ridiculous. He doesn't think these detectives can look on his computer logs and tell when he's logged in and working. They're saying this guy would be logged into his computer some days for only 20 minutes and not be at the police department and turn in a full days of work. It's just ridiculous. Without further ado, let's dive right into this interrogation. These cops are really going to hammer this guy's ignorant excuses.
So the gist of the complaint is you submitted some timesheets showing that you're here at work, when in fact they reviewed the video and you never show up to work. So that's kind of the basic complaint that we received. What's your initial reaction?
Well, I mean, it's 100% true that there's times where that I'm logging work and not here. It happens all the time. I probably work 45% of my time at home. Numerous reasons. A, because it's crazy hours, because I start getting phone calls and text messages starting about sometimes as early as 7 o'clock about things, whatever, all the way until sometimes 9 o'clock at night. So I can't be here all day. And my office is okay, hopefully shows you or whatever, but it's kind of a main thoroughfare for people, and people walk in all the time. So I close my door so I can get work done. I get most of my work done either when my door's closed and people don't think I'm here, if it's late where the bulk of the people who come in and want to talk or whatever are gone, or I'm at home. When I got promoted last year, it was told to me, I was instructed by Captain Gerhard, who was just over there, that my timesheet, keep it simple. 8 to 4, 8 to 4, 8 to 4, 8 to 4. I know your hours aren't going to be 8 to 4, you're going to be all over the place, but 8 to 4 is what you're going to put down in your timesheet. And then keep track of your hours. You can flex your hours however you need to, because we understand that we're going to put a lot of work on you. And that's just kind of the nature of my position, which is basically like 2 positions or 2.5 people's worth of work last year, because they eliminated a job, gave me all that, plus a bunch of other stuff. I can do all that with you. So I was instructed that my timesheet, instead of it being the finance and the city manager didn't want to see my timesheet of, crazy hours of, that I was here from 10 to whatever, or this and that, and that I just kept track of when I worked overtime, and that I could either take it in overtime and pay, or I can take it in, flex my hours, and take off on a Friday if I wanted to, or whatever it was the case would be. So at the beginning of the year, when I got promoted, I was logging that. And I got to a point about 6 months into this where even with taking overtime, even with, I was still like 60 hours at the owed to me. But the problem is I can't take off because that just compounds the problem. So, so I stopped keeping that notebook. I could probably find it. It's in my office. And the other thing is the bulk of my overtime that I work is OBI task force. which I'm not sure if you're really familiar with that. So as the policy says, every minute that I work on the OVI task force has to be in overtime. So the city can get reimbursed, which is why Captain Pullman wasn't allowed to do the OVI task force anymore. He had like 12 years, but he was no longer allowed because when he got promoted and he was salary, there was no provision for him to work in the overtime. So he had to give it all to me. So a ton of it that I do, and some of it's like, so if I work on the OVI task force, for instance, and I'm here during regular work hours, you know, I have to account for that for the city, to be fair to the city, that I'm working on something that's not city related, right? So what I was instructed by Captain Pullman, also what he did, was that he would just put his overtime, you know, he would work on other things when he could. So I take OVI task force stuff home with me all the time. I have access to my email, to Lexipol, to InTime, which is the scheduling software, because I do all the scheduling for patrol sergeants, everybody, dispatch. And so, yeah, I do a ton of work at home. And then the other thing that I do is that because the city owes me so much time, I can't just keep putting overtime on there, because it's just like, it gets to a point where it's just, I mean, I constantly work, constantly. My wife yells at me all the time because I'm nonstop working. I just spent 3 days in the hospital with high blood pressure, where they found signs of a previous stroke, which was scary. Like extremely, 230 over like whatever, crazy stuff. So, and when they did an interview before my stress test, they're asking about like, what is your lifestyle? Like, what does it look like? What are your day-to-day stuff? So I started explaining like, work is the bulk of my stress, because they wanted to know that I recently go through something that was extremely stressful that may explain why your blood pressure is, you know, through the roof and you're about to stroke out or whatever. And when I started listing all the things that I do and everything that I work, a revelation came to me that I've got to take some stuff off my load, because even though I can do it, even though I can physically keep up with everything I'm doing, it's killing me. I mean, it literally is killing me.
This poor lieutenant, I feel so sorry for him. I need that box of Kleenex that's on the table right there, because I'm tearing up over here. And I feel like if he would have just said this at the beginning, that these investigators would have just told him, it's okay, you can go home now. We're dropping the investigation.
So for the timesheet discrepancies, there's 100% going to be time where it says that I'm here at this physical location and then I'm not, and that's normal. And that was what I was instructed to do. Both Captain Pullman and Captain Gerhardt, both, when I asked for advice on the OVI task force from Captain Pullman, he said, yeah, I routinely take stuff home and work on stuff from home. With like, I'll be sitting there with my wife, you know, watching a show while I'm doing my calculations for all the agencies and saturation hours and all that. And then I was instructed to keep my time simple. Just keep it simple, so that way that, you know, it's not crazy looking, so you turn it in, it's, you know, whatever. But yeah, I mean,
All right, let's back up a little bit. Just want to get some information on you. How long have you worked for USDA? Where'd you work prior to here?
I worked for SORTA, Southwest Ohio Regional Transit.
What'd you do there?
I was a job title when I left was technical services coordinator / quality assurance coordinator. I was kind of basically like the assistant director for the maintenance department. So
you started as patrolman here, and then did you have additional duties as you got some time on? Were you detective?
yeah, so when not long after I started, we had an opening in the traffic safety office, and because I investigated fatal crashes with buses as a mechanic and manager, the person Dane Baumgartner, who was in traffic safety at the time, said, "Hey, I think this would be a good fit for you." So we talked about it. I went to a traffic class and said, "Okay, this is pretty cool." So anyway, I was a traffic safety officer for a few years. After being a patrol officer for, I think it was only on the road for a year and a half, and then went to the traffic safety office. I was in the traffic safety office, and we had some pretty major criminal investigations going on. And at that time, Sergeant Gerhardt came to me. They were trying to find a guy who was involved in the shooting. They had all these triangulation phone records from a guy that they were looking for. And he goes, hey, all of our people have looked at these. We're not sure what to do with this. Seemed like a smart guy. You mind taking a look at it, see what you can figure it out. So I spent like an hour on the internet looking up how to do triangulation and stuff and stuff. And I found this PowerPoint. It's probably like a week-long PowerPoint class discussion. I wish I remember who did. And I watched this class and started just like playing through what's going to get to the point. So anyway, I watched this and I found some information. He's like, okay, I think I might do this. So I printed off a map of the area and I went through every azimuth, and it happened to be like, I think T-Mobile, and they published where their towers were and like where their coverage was, which made it really nice. So I took that and kind of overlaid it a map. And then I started putting the azimuth and direction of where he was, and he had to end at this point because the tower only covers to this point. So anyway, I went through all those records, looked at all of his locations, figured out if he was traveling from here to here, what's the likely routes he would have traveled, and then I looked for any discrepancies. So, like, for instance, if I knew that he was in this location because his phone is in this location, but there was a time where because I developed a plate, and so anyway, I turned all that in. I said, here, look, this is my best guess of where I think he lives here. I think his friends are over here. This is where he hangs out a lot and whatever. And so they ended up catching him from a Crime Stoppers type of all things, and it turned out that it was correct. That he was real close to where I pinpointed where he lived and things like that. So some investigation things pretty cool. So we had an opening from about foot on. So the chief, I was still in traffic safety, and I told him I'd do a 5-year commitment. I'm in traffic safety for like 2.5 years at this point in time. I said, hey, look, I know I told you I'd do 5 years, but I kind of like to probably get attached because I think really good. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to have for a few years. Then was promoted to sergeant after that, went back to the road. I was a second shift supervisor for 4 years-ish. And then last October, not last, the previous October, I was working 2022, was promoted to lieutenant. So that's.
You were promoted to lieutenant in your current position you're in now. Administrative.
Well, I'm support services, bureau commander. But so at the same time that I got promoted, we did some major transition moves. We used to have a staff sergeant. The staff sergeant took care of schedule, payroll, and utilities. And if you guys know Sergeant Allison Schley, she ran that for about 4 years. It was very overwhelming. Very overwhelming for anyone. There was a lot of work with the schedule, payroll, and utilities. Well, when they eliminated that position, they decided, and when Steve Schuller retired and they moved captains around, things like that, they said, well, they're going to get all the schedule, payroll, and fleet teaming. On top of that, I oversee CIS and CIU. I oversee records, property room, dispatch, Lexipol, which is our policies and procedures. The OBI task force got dumped on me. The LEL grant, which is the law enforcement liaison for the Ohio Traffic Safety Office grant, falls on me. Traffic Safety Office, I oversee all the K-9 officers. I mean, there's a huge umbrella. So on top of all of that, that's why I said I need like 2 people's jobs at least, maybe 2.5 people. Which is why I end up having to work from home this time, because I just can't. If I'm here, I don't get as much done with everybody in my office. And I can't be here, 14, 15 hours a day every day. I was probably in the force.
So what's the approval process for working from home? Do you have to tell the chief, hey, I'm on this?
No, I just, it was just like so none of the command staff really know where they are at any time. You need to get a hold of them, you just call them. Because I don't know what Roger's doing, Rob's doing, Pete, whatever. I mean, I think that Pete probably has the most predictable schedule. He's usually here early, and Rogers, everybody else, I have no idea, what their schedule is.
In any interrogation, the number one goal of the interrogators is to keep their suspect talking. And this Lieutenant Jason Swarthout has just been talking the whole time. These detectives don't even have to ask any questions. He's just over-explaining and explaining and explaining and explaining. And by them just sitting there and listening and recording everything he says, they're going to use all this against him in the end to just bury him.
I will text Rob that, hey, I'm working from home today. There's something you need, whatever. I'm just gonna. But most of the time, I only work from home maybe in the morning, and then I'll come in, and then maybe work, from home a little bit later. Hopefully, I get it all done. Look like by the time I work from home in the morning and get some of the more important things done, all the schedule stuff mostly, and then get here and work on whatever you do. So no, there is no approval process. I just tell them what I'm doing, and if they need to get hold of me, they can call me and figure it out. The other thing is, like, if I need to flex a day. So if I don't even know how many hours that I've worked and not taken pay or time off for. The last time that I stopped, it was in the 60s on how much the city owed me as far as time or pay. So shame on me for not keeping track on exactly what the number is, but it got to the point where it was just ridiculous. It got to the point where I was like, well, I can't take off, because if I take off, then I get back up. So Captain Gerhardt and I a lot would play golf. Like, hey, you got plenty of time, let's go play golf, on this particular day. Sure. And I would keep track of, when I took off and things like that. But the thing is that I would still have to work that day. Even if I took off, I would still end up working that day for at least probably 3 or 4 hours, because things needed to be done and nobody else does what I do. Nobody else, I can't just give it to somebody else and say, here, you take care of this. I go on vacation and I take my laptop and my iPad with me, and I'm working on vacation, because I don't log those hours. I don't say, well, whatever. It's just like, I just know that the position requires so much of me that I just do what I have to do. I'm in the hospital in between stress tests when they put the contrast in. You gotta wait like half hour to get in, and I'm taking phone calls and text messaging and doing work while I'm in the hospital. My wife about lost her mind when I was laying in bed, and she's like, what are you doing? I'm like, she's like, this is what's killing you, is that you're nonstop working. I'm like, well, what am I supposed to do with that? Nobody else does this. I can't just say, hey, can you take care of it? Now, I was able to make a couple phone calls. Roger took care of something that needed to happen for me, but a lot of it I just have to do.
Okay. I want to look at a couple days in particular. Saturday, November 11th. And you report, okay, so you actually don't put in what you're working, but you do come in here and work for, looks like about 2 hours. So you don't put it on your timesheet that you're here. But then on Sunday, you don't show up, but you put in for 4 hours. Can you walk me through what your thought process was on that?
Well, I didn't. So the 11th was a holiday. Veterans Day. I needed to come in to probably do payroll. I didn't want to put in that I was here on a holiday, because it looks like, why would you be, well, if you have the option of coming in on a non-holiday, why come in on a holiday for holiday pay? So I'm just going off the body. It's most likely the case. So I most likely worked even more on that Sunday. So I knew that I worked the day before for 2 hours, and it's a minimum of 3 hours when you come into the office and work. When on an off day, it's a minimum of 3. And I probably had another hour of working from home and just compiled it in 4 hours on Sunday. That way I wasn't putting down holiday, because I think that I wouldn't want my people, if they have the option of coming in, if I knew that they had to come in on the weekend to do payroll, and they had the option of coming in on a day that wasn't a holiday and not whatever, I'd be like, why tax the city on a holiday? I probably had something to do on that Sunday, so that it shows you good morning and whatever. So I probably just decided to knock it out on the 11th. I'm just going to let that name. Okay.
Well, on Saturday, after you leave here, you start traveling to Virginia, and you're in Virginia at least through Monday. But on Monday, your timesheet shows that you were here 8 to 4.
Yeah. So my son is stationed in Virginia, and I took my iPad and my laptop for every trip that I've gone to Virginia. Because I've gone now, I think 3 times, because he was an AIT, National Guard. So there's no doubt that I worked, even though I might have worked later when I got there.
Like, what would you do? Like, run me through.
So typically, it's almost usually schedule related. Sometimes it could be a task force, depending on like what I need to get done. So if I have an agency who turns something in where I need to make a correction to their things, and I submit it to the state, and the state sends back and says, this is wrong, which happened a ton because this year was a huge learning experience when we doing the other task force. So then I'll have to make corrections to that. Most of what I did was schedule it, as far as like from, if I was home or not home, if I was outside of the office, when I had the laptop and the Mac, because I could get in time on there. So most of it was approving people's time off, posting overtime, posting for off-duty details. It was almost, I would say, probably 80% of it was scheduled.
Is all that done through InTime, which is a software for your schedule? Okay.
Some of it's just checking the schedule. Some of it's going through and checking to make sure that the sergeant, because the sergeants on duty are supposed to be filling the schedule, but they don't. So I always check it to make sure that when a posting comes down, so if somebody called in sick, for instance, the protocol is for them to call the on-duty supervisor and say, hey, I'm going to sick, I'm the on-duty supervisor posted overtime. That hardly ever happens. They call me. But if it does happen, when it gets posted by a sergeant, then I just always have to fix the posting, but it's hardly ever correct. And then make sure it gets assigned to the proper person as well, because we completely redid the way we do overtime now. So overtime is now on a round robin process. So I've got the spreadsheet that I can access that I can see who's due. So if 2 people sign up for the overtime, I can say, well, this person is the one who gets it. Or if nobody signs up for overtime, I can say, well, this is the person who's getting forced because of where they fall on the overtime list. If that makes sense. And I do that constantly.
How long would you spend on schedule? Like, for instance, on this weekend, you're in Virginia. How long would you spend on schedule?
Depends on, probably, honestly, it's probably only a couple hours a night, at least. Now, I might not put it all on, so if I worked overtime, I was working let's just say I worked 2 hours one night, 3 hours another night, or whatever. I may just put it all on one day that I worked overtime, especially if I was out of town. Like I may just keep track of home on vacation or home, whatever, instead of saying, well, I spent 2 hours this night, an hour this day, whatever. Just say, like I spent a total of 4 hours working on the schedule, and I'll put that on a day that makes sense. So it may not even be the day that I.
So if you, I didn't mean to catch up, but so if you work overtime I'm using this on Saturday, if you work a couple hours, and then Sunday you work 3 hours, you may just put them all on for Sunday.
Sure.
Is that what you're saying? Sure. So instead of working 2 hours here for overtime and 4 hours or 3 hours here, you just total it up for 5 hours on one day.
Yeah, and that might come be on a Monday that I put it on there, or depending on where the schedule falls, I try to be cognizant of the fact that I'm not putting hours on, days that it's going to cause, a holiday or something.
So you going to Virginia, out of state, and you do not have to get that approved from anybody, saying I'm out of state, but I'm going to work remotely from another state.
Well, for example, Monday, November 13th, is a holiday. It would have been observed better safe.
I guess for me, it would have been,
And you're putting that you worked 8 hours being facts. You probably did. You may have worked a couple hours the day prior.
So I don't recall how many hours I worked for that weekend, but because the schedule owes me so much time. I don't know what the banquet hours are that I have not hung, but I haven't either taken off for because I can't, or taken over. Like I said, the last time I checked, it was over 60. It was in the 60s. So I will so some of the time that's counted, I'll put on a day that it's like, of course, it's like, why wouldn't I have a full day on holiday? I'm working my butt off all the time. So if the schedule owes me over 60 something hours and I work 4 or 5 hours on a particular thing, I could make that into a full day knowing that like the schedule owes me so many hours anyway. I'm not saying that I can think of a specific time where I had that. It's just a thought now. So I worked so much. I worked like nonstop. It's just one of those things where it's just like, well, of course I worked on Christmas Day. I worked on New Year's Day. I worked on Christmas Eve. I work when I'm in the hospital. I work. It's one of those things where it's a nonstop, constant.
The city of Blue Ash should be ashamed of themselves for overworking this lieutenant all the time. I mean, it's almost like the equivalent of slavery. Man, they should build a statue of this man in Blue Ash, and they should make this an example of how not ever to treat another employee ever again. I mean, this is worse than China.
So just give me an example on any given day where you're working on a schedule. How much time do you dedicate to it?
Sometimes, like I said, it's just going through and looking, but like recently, I say so. At the end of the year, I work a lot more than I make during the middle of the year. And the reason for that is because I'm inputting and creating a template for the next year's schedule. And this was my first time doing it completely by myself. Last year, I had some help with Allison and Scholler, who had done this before. We all kind of got into a room, we did it together, because we were going to a 12-hour schedule, which was completely new to the department. We had never had 12s before that I knew of. So I had their help creating a template, figuring out, because we had to do shift days, figuring out who goes where, and then inputting that all into the calendar, getting a hold of everybody, making sure that they're picking their short day by seniority. So at the end of the year, I did that all by myself, which was a huge task. And so I did a ton of that from home when I could, just because I couldn't keep up with it. So it just depends on the season to give you a time frame of exactly how much I'm working on the schedule. I probably won't work on it as much in the middle of June, just because everything's flowing mostly. But it depends. We get somebody who's off IOD, and now all of a sudden I'm posting a ton of overtime for all of their openings because you have minimum shift requirements. Then I may end up working a ton. So right now we just had one retire, so I got one on military leave. We got one on IOD. There's another one as well. Anyway, the schedule's kind of a mess right now because we have a lot of people off. We're trying to hire new people, so I just loaded their schedules end to end time, which takes forever. You have to go through, and it's not like it's just one click of a button and I can just populate and load their schedule. It's a hard question to answer as far as how much time I spend on a day-to-day basis on the schedule, because there's some days I could spend 16 hours. There's other days I could spend 4. There's other days I could spend.
When you're working from home, it's primarily for this.
Primarily, I would say that 20% of it could be ODI task force related. It could be just answering calls and text messages that are about investigations, that are about canine stuff, about our records or Axon or uniforms, because I'm in charge of uniforms. I have Sergeant Baumgartner helping with that too, but I do all the uniforms and gear. So if somebody needs something ordering, I do all the procurement for firearms team. So if they need something ordered, I order all that. And the firearms sergeant is a night shift, so he will text me or call me at night and say, hey, whatever. It just depends. There's a huge umbrella of calls and texts and work that come in that it's not I would say the bulk of it's scheduled, but it may not be the bulk every day. It could be something else that comes up. It could have, we could get a CIS call out where Dane calls me and we have to talk about, what we're going to do for the next hour. It's just like, well, we talk this through and figure out what we're going to need, what kind of resources we need, what not going to cause that help. It could be texting off-duty details, because if we can't fill a detail internally, there's about 7 or 8 outside agency people that we routinely use. So I'm calling and texting them. So I'll text them and say, hey, can you work Shabbat on this day? Well, of course, I've got to wait half an hour to give them time to reply, So usually 2 hours later, I've got enough people texted that I finally filled that job. So it could be that. It could be just a wide array of things that are on my plate, but I can't say for sure exactly how many hours are spent on stuff.
I mean, here's my issue. Like, we've looked at the records, we've looked at the dates in question. And I've looked, so your scheduling software keeps an audit of how much times. We're talking about a matter of minutes, not hours, but like you're spending minutes on it. But yet you're putting that you're here for 8 hours. What else could you be doing for 8 hours?
Well, like I said, if I wasn't here for 8 hours, then I'm taking that time off potentially. So if there's a time where I'm not working on either schedule or whatever it is that I'm working on, and I'm logging that I'm here or I'm logging that I'm working, it's because the schedule owes me so many hours that it's just like I can't take the overtime. I just flex my time where I'm just like, well, you're here, but you take off. And it happens all the time.
So you have this arbitrary, you have this number 60 hours.
It's probably more than that.
It's probably, like, it's something you've calculated over time that's owed to you.
Right.
And you said you were keeping track of it, but then kind of stopped.
We just got 2 ridiculous numbers. So it's just like, why am I keeping track of this? Because I can never take off.
So based on that, that you believe that you can take off because the city owes you that time.
Well, that's what I was instructed to do. I was instructed.
And they said, hey, I have all this time that I've accumulated that I've worked and never put in for.
Right.
But I'm just going to take it as I go. I mean, here, there, and I'm gonna say I'm working, but I'm not, because I'm gonna put in for the shift, the hours. But because the city owes me this time, I'm just gonna take it off. I'm gonna be on the books, but off, not doing work. Does that sum it up?
Correct.
Because of that time that you have in your bank, informal bank.
So just,
Right.
You bring it down to a week. Let's just say that if I worked 40 hours Monday through Thursday, and I wanted to take off Friday, so we just break it down to a small week, just so it's easier, to look at it. Then that happens all the time. I mean,
Well, we're aware of flexing. We flex
so this is flexing on a scale of where I've got so many hours the city owes me that I stopped keeping track of it because it got ridiculous. So that, it was just like, why am I even keeping track? I'm never going to be able to take off this many hours. I'm never going to be able to put in for even the overtime for it all, just because it's like, that becomes a ridiculous thing as well. So
when you're in Virginia, are you working, or are you taking that bank time?
both working. I may not work 8 hours. I may have only worked, I don't know. I'm not sure.
Okay, that's fair. So, but my point is, so you take this bang time, whether you're in Virginia, whether you're in Ohio.
Sure.
But you, according to you, you don't tell anybody. So who's your direct supervisor?
Captain Gerhardt.
Okay. You don't tell Gerhardt, hey, Captain, I'm going to Virginia. I'll be out of state, but I'm going to be on the clock because I'm going to bring my laptop, my iPad, and I'm going to work from where I'm going to see my son in AIT. Okay. So that you don't have to do that. You think that's appropriate to leave the state in your position, like you said, big umbrella, all these responsibilities, right? You think it's appropriate to leave the state, not tell your direct supervisor, I'm out of state, but I'm going to be working, particularly with you being over the investigative section. So I'm just curious, you believe that's a proper way to conduct?
I would tell him I'm
Yourself.
going to be out of town. So if I'm going to be out of town, he knows, hey, I'm going to be out of town. And that either,
So when you went to, I don't mean to cut you off, but I don't want to lose my train of thought.
sure,
So when you're in Virginia, you told Gerhard, I'm in Virginia, and I'm not going to be available to respond if need be of homicide, etc., whatever it may happen.
sure.
You know, I'm not going to be. If you let him know that you're out of town, but you don't let him know, hey, I'm going to stay on the clock. I'm bringing my laptop. I'm going to be able to deal with issues as they come up, fill in details, doing scheduling, doing everything it is you do, answer calls, uniforms, or whatever you have to deal with. So you don't tell him that, but you tell him you're out of town.
Right. Okay. I have a follow-up question. to that.
Sure.
If you told him you were out of town,
Mhm.
why would there be a text message from you to him saying you have a lingering headache? When in fact you're in Virginia. Why would you tell him you have a headache? Because if you're taking a sick, if he already knows you're out of town, why would you say?
Mhm. Yeah.
You see how it looks?
Sure.
I mean, I'm again, like he told you, we're not tricking you. We're not saying we got you. We're just trying to wrap our brains around that. Obviously, they have major concerns about this. Okay, when they're saying that they told you could do all this, they obviously have major concerns over what they're seeing. Hence the reason why they call us in. Okay. So we're just trying to wrap our brains around it. And to be honest with you, Jason, it's not making any sense to me. I've been doing this a long time. Now we flex as BCI agents.
Sure.
Okay. We work, if we reach 40 hours and we got not much going on, I'll take a Friday off. I'll tell my boss, hey, I'm at my 40. I'm taking Friday off. Going to go hang out with the wife and kids. You know what I mean? And I will not be working. I will not be, I mean, obviously we answer calls and stuff, but I'm just trying to figure out, you're in Virginia and you're putting in 8 hours of work and you're telling them you're out of town, but you're not telling them, oh, I'm out of work. And then you text your boss saying, hey, I have a headache today, but you're in Virginia. Why do they give a shit if you have a headache and you're in Virginia?
The day was that I had a headache, because I don't even know.
Tuesday in October.
Was I allegedly in Virginia that day?
Hey, you're definitely in Virginia.
Mhm.
You send me text message saying, hey, lingering headache. What about Thanksgiving? Where were you at Thanksgiving?
Virginia.
Did you say you were working again?
They all knew I was going to Virginia.
Who's they all?
The whole plane said I think I was going to Virginia.
On Thanksgiving?
Yes.
When did you leave for Virginia? Wednesday, right? Probably.
Probably something like
Because you're here from 8 to 4. You come here, you're here from 7 to about 10:30, and then you head to Virginia. And then you report that you work overtime pay, overtime holiday pay. Thanksgiving and the day after both day holidays. But you're not here.
Mhm.
And I find it hard to believe that you worked on Thanksgiving while you're in Virginia visiting your son. When your car is all over the place. All those days you're there. You're all over the place. You're not stationary in one place. All over.
Okay, so if the schedule owes me an exorbitant amount of hours, well, I'm never going to be able to accumulate either putting that into the form of getting paid for that or taking off work. Like, there's no way I can take off like 2 weeks and just say, hey, I'm going to take off, and all the days that are owed to me, I'm going to take off a 2-week vacation because the schedule owes me 2 weeks worth of hours. So a day here and a day there, as far as like recouping my hours, as far as, like, why not have that on a holiday where I would normally be able to take off?
Okay.
I
understand what you're saying. Okay. I understand what you're saying. But applying hours retroactively that the city owes you from, months before doesn't make any sense to me. Okay, I understand it's hard to take time off with everything you have, but people do it every single day of the week. I mean, we all have immense responsibilities, but everybody takes vacations, everybody takes time off, and things get done when they get done. But when you're talking about that you have this informal bank of hours, I'm not saying they not owed to you, but you have this informal bank of hours that's not in any type of official bank, whether it be a comp bank, vacation bank, and then you're applying them as you wish. But in this particular case, you're applying them to 2 paid holidays.
Sure.
So how do we know that bank of hours is consistent with working holidays? You see what I'm talking about? Am I making any sense?
Sure.
How do you know that bank's not paid in full?
How do I know?
Right.
It was never getting smaller. Even when I would take off to play golf here and there, whatever, and I was writing down, hey, I took off 4 hours early to play golf with Rob. Nonetheless, I ended up working 4 hours later, or the next 2 days took up for that. So it was never getting smaller. It never one time was it getting to a point to where that I was catching up with it. So that's why I stopped, because I was like, well, it's just pointless.
What did the chief say when you told him, I'm having these problems, I can't get all this work done, I'm owed this much time? What did the chief say when you told him?
Well, I haven't had that direct conversation with the chief. I'm a pleaser, and I don't want to make it look like that I can't handle the duties that have been given to me. So the only conversations I've had about being overwhelmed with work is I have had some conversations with Captain Coleman about having a lot on my plate and overtime. And we both discussed some ideas of how to take some things off my plate. So just recently, I took Lexipol and I gave it to Sergeant Duncan. But I'm still training him on how to do it all. But he just recently got it. So that was a plan in place to kind of take that off my plate. Captain Gerhardt was originally going to take over the fleet for me, but that didn't work out. But I still kept kind of getting fleet-related stuff. So, because he knew that there was a lot on my plate. And he told me, like, look, you're not working for free. When I got promoted, one of his first things to me he said was, Jason, I'm straight to working. We're going to have a lot on your plate, and take off when you can, and you can flex your hours, take the overtime, I don't care. Make sure that you're taking care of you because nobody else is going to take care of you. And I don't want to let him down.
Are you an hourly employee?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And do you accumulate vacation?
Correct.
And do you accumulate comp time?
Right.
Okay. And so what is your vacation balance, roughly? What's your maximum? What's the max you can carry?
I'm at the max.
Well, what would it be if you were at the max? Is it 700? Is it 600?
Sure. I think that my vacation balance, if I had to just guess, is probably around 200 hours.
And your comp balance?
It's probably around 60 hours, 40 hours.
Well, what's the max comp you can carry?
For lieutenants, I think we can carry a max of 100 or 180 for you. It's different with patrol.
Why is that not full? With as many hours as you are, why is it not full?
I can't take it.
I understand that things are busy and you cannot take it right now, according to you, but why wouldn't you put that in there? Why wouldn't you put this 60 hours why wouldn't you put in for normal overtime?
Sometimes I did. Sometimes it was like, well, I worked extremely amount of time, so I put in the overtime.
I understand working from home and trying to get shit done. I get that. But my point is, instead of doing, you have all these hours that you didn't put in for, but now you're putting in for it when you're not here and working. That's where we have issues, because you're saying, hey, I put in for this, that I worked this day, but I really didn't because they owe me time from time before. You see how that's problematic? I mean, I'm not making this shit up.
No, and to answer your question you asked probably 10 minutes ago is does that seem like a responsible way to run things? If I were in charge of me, if I was Captain Gerhardt, then I would do things different. I wouldn't have, I'm not trying to remember this. Because I respect him and he's been really empty. But
Anyway, what was that last part?
I said, I'm not trying to throw him under the bus because I respect him.
And then you said something.
He's been great.
Okay.
So, but I wouldn't have it to where that, you had to get approval. I would have it to where that you had to be, I would have analyzed, so everybody who works for me, I make sure that they're enough on their plate that they can do what they need to do and do it without having to cut corners, without having to wreck their family life. There's a few people that I'm concerned about that I work for me, so I routinely talk to them about their schedule, making sure that they're good because they do have a lot on their plate. I don't get that. I get, hey, like, you need help with something? So, well, if I need help with something, I couldn't give it to him anyway because he doesn't have to do whatever I did. But
this guy is just continuing to play the victim here. I'm surprised these two detectives that are interrogating him haven't went through that whole box of Kleenex yet. I mean, it's just sad. I'm almost in tears. And I'll tell you another thing. This Lieutenant Swartout, he should get a job in the private sector and see how he likes that. In the private sector, if you're 5 minutes late from lunch, you're getting your ass chewed out and you might get your time docked. I mean, they gave this guy an easy schedule. They let him keep up with his own time. And look what he did. He stole from the taxpayers and he's playing the victim. He's still acting like he's overworked and underpaid here. It is ridiculous.
Him and my relationship is basically like if I need him, I call him. If he needs me, he calls me. And there's never a time where he's needing me and I'm not there or I'm not available for whatever he needs. Mm-hmm. Same thing if I need him, he's there. He may not be in the office, but if I call him and need something, whatever. But yeah, you're right. I probably would run things differently if I was in his shoes.
So are you saying the reason that you do what you do as far as this 60 hours that you refer to, and it may be more, I know this hourly informal, I'm going to call it, we can change the terminology, but more of an informal stockpile of hours that you've worked that's owed you by the city.
Sure.
So are you kind of putting in that burden on your bosses, saying that they shouldn't have ran it like that?
Well, that's exactly what I was instructed to do. I was instructed to don't work for free.
Right.
Make sure that if so put down your overtime, or you can take time off, regardless, and take care of you because nobody else is going to, which it's a great thing to say, but the reality is that I was killing myself because I was constantly working. But yeah, I would run things differently. I would evaluate their plate. So if I was issues, I would evaluate my plate and say, okay, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to look at my schedule and say, well, and my timesheet and say, well, you're taking overtime, which we've had some conversations because the chief has had some issues with the way that I've labeled some of my overtime. So in the past, I would put like admin, just because everything I do is administrative, right? Because on the timesheet it says reason for your overtime. So I put admin, or sometimes I put schedule. Sometimes I put payroll. Sometimes I put whatever. Well, the admin ones, I guess, had him kind of confused on exactly what those were.
Overly broad.
Yeah. So Captain Gerhardt came to me and said, hey, I know that you're working. I know that you do a lot. And then you have on your plate. He goes, well, the overtime that you're putting on here is kind of, he's kind of confused on what that means for admin. Okay, well, what do you want me to put?
Well, did you explain it to them right then and there? Like, dude, I'm doing all these things. Like, there's only 8 hours in a day, and I can't get it all done in one day. Did you explain it?
I mean, I have explained it, but just kind of meant. Like when I took the position, and they said, "Hey, we're giving you all of this. We know you're going to be overloaded. We know that this is going to be a lot on your plate. However, it's not going to be forever. We're going to do this to figure things out, and then we're going to make adjustments as needed." But
right then and there, when the chief's looking at your overtime, did you say, like, I am working this overtime?
Well, he knows that, Rob knows I'm working the overtime. He just wanted me to categorize it differently. So I was like,
He wanted you to narrow it down a little bit more far, right?
it was kind of more put just don't put the same thing. Don't put admin 3 times on that page. You know, have either narrow it down or have it to where it's like, you know. So if I did, you know, I can think, you know, all the different things, you know. But if I had, you know, overtime that was related to property room or records or CIS and then don't just put admin down. Just put one thing of the whatever it was. Or
You should be more specific as to what you're doing.
it wasn't necessarily more specific. It was just kind of like changing it up so it wasn't the same thing.
Okay.
So I'm like, okay, well, I'll put whatever you want on there. And then he knew I was working. I was keeping up on everything I needed to do. I mean, if I'm guilty of anything in this regard, I'm guilty of working too much and not putting all the time that I did work on my timesheets. Listing that I am flexing the hours, the days, or whatever's on a holiday when I wasn't physically here or even out of state on a holiday. Seemed like it. I mean, it makes sense because it's like I'm already owed so much and working so much as it is. Why not have that as a day that I'm flexing, or have a day that I might have only worked a few hours, but put that I work a full day? You know what I mean?
Yeah, but the problem is you're putting that you work 2 days, holiday pay,
I can understand that.
and you're not even here.
I can understand.
I get flexing, but I think you're trying to convolute flexing into this to why you're doing what you're doing. You know, flexing is not putting on the Thanksgiving Day rate that I worked both of these days for holiday pay, and in some cases overtime, when you're not even in the state. And I'll be honest with you, Jason, I don't believe when you're in Virginia all around that you're doing work. I'm sure you probably took some calls and did some peddling around on the laptop or the computer, but I don't think you're working. Okay, so you can't have it both ways.
Records certainly don't show.
Either you're working and you're putting in for the time because you're working, or you did what you told us, you put in for the time because they owe it to you. So which one is it? Or is it both?
It's both. I mean, that particular trip to Virginia on Thanksgiving, I don't recall how many, phone calls I took and how many times I even looked at the schedule. I don't remember. I know I had it with me for sure. I had the laptop.
Okay, well, I bring my work laptop with me too, but I seldom open it. Just because you brought it doesn't mean you used it.
Well, I remember using it.
Okay.
More hours were probably flexed on that particular day than actually worked. And if the city doesn't want me to use flex hours on a holiday, then I'm fine with that. I'm completely fine with it. I have no problem. But it was never.
But you
never told me.
But you think it's proper, for the record, we're on tape. You think it's proper to put in that you work 2 days at holiday pay and not even here. I don't care if you're out of state or home. You believe that in your scenario is proper.
I wouldn't have it that way, but it was never described to me that it was improper.
So you're defaulting back to you were told not to do that.
I wasn't told not to do that.
Okay.
It was told to flex whenever you can because
Flexing is working 60 hours and you're at 60 to 50 to 40, 60 hours on Thursday and say, hey, I'm going to go golf on Friday and take the rest of the week off. That's flexing. That's the definition of flexing.
I totally agree. In my particular case, the hours just kept adding up to where I was just not able to flex. I wasn't able to flex the time to be off. I had to take it in overtime or flex when I could. So if I had something to do where I could flex, then I'm like, well, I could finally take some flex hours because I'm going to be XYZ. I'm going to be out of town. I've got this function to do. So I can finally flex some time because I've got, I worked enough previously to get everything set up where I can flex the hours.
Here's the problem I have with this whole flexing. I'll say by what you try to explain it. I've analyzed a few months of your timesheets and the records, and you come out ahead on that. The city is losing to the tune of over $12,000, where you're not here, where I assume you're flexing.
Damn.
How is that? Or as you say, working from home. But again, I've looked at the scheduling software, and it's on each day where you plan your work from home, when you're not here, which minutes where you're in that schedule. So
I think a maximum of 20 minutes on
yeah, it's not
any given day.
It's not. You may stagger it a little bit here and there, but we're talking minutes. We're not talking an hour. We're not even talking an hour of time that you spend on this schedule when you say you're alone.
He's like, oh shit. Now he's in that moment because these detectives let him talk and let him give all of his excuses. And his excuses is he's been doing all this work from home. Well, these detectives have already looked in the computer programs that he's supposed to work, and he's only been in there minutes each day, 20 minutes at the most, they said. And right now, this guy is really realizing how bad he screwed up. That's why you should always ask for a lawyer and never agree to these interrogations. But I'm glad that this Lieutenant Jason Swartout did, because now we can all watch this and laugh at him.
You see the issue here? And this is just 3 months that we've been able to analyze so far. In this, the city's definitely not coming out ahead.
They said in those 3 months, they've calculated that this man's already stolen at least $12,000.
Anything else going
I
on?
would disagree on, I mean, whether or not I'm in the scheduling software or I'm not. If I'm logging that I've worked so many hours, it's because I've worked so many hours, whether I'm here, whether I'm home, whether I'm wherever. I'm constantly working. I mean, I'm working, like I said, when I'm in the hospital. And I put down that I was sick those days. If you look on that timesheet, I didn't log any hours.
That's not what we were told so far. So, but we'll verify.
Well, it was just this past Friday. So I was only off on Monday, Friday, because I left Thursday afternoon. Yeah, so I'm in the hospital sick and so. I mean, I get what you're saying.
Let's talk about December 13th. Scheduled to work that day. Timesheet reflects 8 to 4. You arrive early. You arrive at 6:40, and you leave at 5:45. But you're working an off-duty detail, scheduled from 7:30 to 5:30. How can you be working your normal hours in an off-duty detail, and then another detail on top of that? I mean, you're getting paid 3 times for the same hours.
Again,
by 3 different entities.
I had an opportunity to use some flex time because nobody signed up for that off-duty detail. I did not want to work that off-duty detail. So the last thing I want to do is work an off-duty detail because I'm so busy. Nobody signed up for it. When the Israeli Hamas stuff kicked off, we have a lot of Jewish facilities around here. A lot of people called in for off-duty details the other week. And so I couldn't fill that one. So I went and worked it. And I said, I'll just flex a day. I'll have my iPad with me and stuff in case something happens. I'll have my cell phone in case something happens. It was, I think, right across the street.
You understand that's triple dipping, right?
Well, no, because I've already owed. If I have to take off in order to be compensated for the times I worked overtime, but not claimed overtime, didn't put it in my comp bank. I've got my bank of hours that I can flex. That was a perfect opportunity for me to go ahead and flex that day and work an off-duty detail.
I'm not seeing it.
You're still getting paid for that day, though. But that's not the definition of flex.
You're here.
You're getting paid by 3 different agencies. Blue
If I had a nickel for every time they said flex, I'd be a millionaire.
Ash, and then the 2 entities for the detail. There's a
The OBI
2 and
task
1. Yeah. The OBI task force requirement is you have to fulfill your 8-hour day before you can start tapping into the
It's a
OBI.
day by day thing.
That's not what it's going to mean, and that's not how.
And certainly the OBI task force doesn't owe you anything. That's 60 hours. They don't owe you any of that. So there's some days where you're saying you're working this OBI task force. You're not here.
Which is being paid by the state of Ohio, not
Which is being
Blue
paid by the federal government.
Because I'm working on the task force. I may not even.
But you're not here. How are you working on the task force if you're not here?
I've been working it up from home. I can see on email.
Okay, so
what's going on.
So there's records then, so you work email, I'm assuming, right?
Mhm.
So there's records of you interacting with the state and the federal government on,
So it could be just me just printing off the papers that are from the task force and then just going over the sheets and then putting like all the agency information into one of the other, into a tabulation and then making sure that they all add up and everybody's fringe rates are correct and all the stuff that you have to go through on a monthly basis for all the OBI task force stuff. And there's a lot of work that goes involved in that. So Roger routinely, when he gave it to me, he said that he would print off stuff and work from home because he couldn't get it all done while he was here.
But you're saying you're working these hours like after normal hours, like from like 6 p.m. to like 8 p.m. You're saying you're working this OBI.
And that's
There'd be nobody here to bother you and you could close your door and work this.
Sometimes I was physically here doing it, and sometimes I was during those hours. So if I logged 6 to 8, sometimes it was 6 p.m. to from 4 to 8 or from 4 to 6, whatever it was. There was other times I was working on it from like 10 until noon because I had to hurry up and get stuff over to finance so that they had time to cut POs and get me check numbers so I could have that. But I can't log that during my normal work hours because then the city doesn't get reimbursed for that. I have to log that at overtime. So then when I'm at home working or here working on something not OBI task force related, then I'll put the OBI task force hours on that. Does that make sense? So if I worked 10 to noon on the OBI task force, just going on and moving,
I got you, you tack it on the back.
I would tack that on the back. And
I understand.
because if I put it during my normal work hours, then I can't submit that to the state for reimbursement. Does that make sense?
I hear what you're saying, and I disagree with you as far as it has to be overtime. I don't think that's correct. I think you could just not work your 8 hours here and get paid straight time for that task force, but that's neither here nor there. But
I can't do that. Well, at least I can't get reimbursed. I could, but then I'd be taking money away from the city because I'm doing work that's not city related. That's the reason.
on other days you were triple dipping on one day and you get paid by 3 different.
And I flexed my hours on a day that I took off physically here because I was owed so many hours, but I wasn't triple dipping. I just didn't put in the overtime that I worked previously. I put those into my bank of hours.
Yeah, again, this is this bank of hours that's never been recorded formally in your comp bank. That's the problem.
Right?
I mean, I'm not saying you didn't work your ass off, or I don't know, to be honest with you. I just don't know. But if it's not documented or it's not in your bank, then they do not exist. You can't retroactively say, hey, I worked all these hours over, 4 months ago, and it's owed to me. So I'm just going to, at my choosing, take these days off, but yet get paid for them, and particularly some overtime, some holiday pay. It just doesn't make sense to me.
I see what you're saying, and I don't disagree that that's a better way of handling. That's not.
It's absolutely the wrong way to handle it. And in my opinion, it's criminal. Because how are you ever gonna tell anybody or show to anybody that, hey, 4 months ago I worked all these hours and it's owed to me, but I have no record of it. I know you said you kept a notebook of all the hours you worked, but then you stopped keeping track of it. Do you understand how this sounds? I mean, I've worked with you. You're not stupid. You worked in the private sector. How many years? Yeah. I mean, come on. Listen to yourself talk and explain this to me. Please.
The only thing I can say is I would have done this. If I were the chief or in that position, I would not have so much liberty involved with that. But it was explained to me when I started that this is how you're going to do it. I don't want you to write for free.
When you say liberty, so they're trusting you to do the right thing.
Correct.
And you have a lot of freedom.
Correct.
Okay? So what you're saying is because of that, this is why it happened. Because they gave you a lot of rope, so to speak, that this was able to kind of occur because it was that loose.
I would say because my workload has been so, and because of the rules or lack of rules that was given on how to handle getting everything done and getting compensated enough time off for a good work-life balance, that this is the result. Is that I work my ass off. I promise you that. And I have so many hours that the city either owes me overtime or in time off that I got to the point to where I stopped tracking.
But yet your comp bank's not full.
Right.
And you didn't put in when you had the opportunity, you didn't put in for overtime.
Sometimes I did.
Which doesn't make sense to me. Sometimes doesn't make sense to me.
Well, it's like this. It's if I worked in a given pay period, if I worked 12 hours of overtime in OBI task force, I have to log those OBI task force hours.
I understand.
In order to get that back. If I worked an additional 10 hours overtime from the city, then what my mind does is I equate to, okay, well, I got another day that's owed to me plus 2 hours. I'll just put in 2 hours of overtime for whatever. I almost always put in for overtime that I had to come in on a day off when I come in for payroll. Like I was just here this past Sunday for probably 5 hours. Now, it wasn't just all payroll. Part of it was payroll. And then a huge sum of it was doing other things. I didn't plan on putting 5 hours on my next pay period that I was here doing whatever. I would put the regular 3 hours to call in, to do payroll, and then those extra hours would just go into that bank.
Were you here at Christmas? Yeah, for Christmas.
Was it here at the office?
Right. Did you put in your timesheet that you worked 8 hours with it?
I probably put in I had my flex time and put that I was, that I was 8 to 4 throughout and getting compensated for the days that I was there.
About New Year's.
I wasn't physically, I did work. I'm not working on New Year's.
How many hours? 8 hours?
Not 8 hours.
What'd you put on your timesheet?
8 hours, I'm sure, because it's a normal look day.
These are public record. These are your timesheets. And they're not accurate.
I totally understand, and I agree with you. They're not because that's the way I was instructed to do things. I was instructed to 8 to 4, 8 to 4. No matter if you came in at 10 or whether it would be whatever, and that if you have to take work home with you, take it home. Do what you need to do from work or from home. Don't do anything for free. And flex your hours if you can. You can flex your hours. If not, we'll take your overtime because we understand.
Again, in my opinion, flexing hours isn't putting in holiday day 2 days a year here.
And I don't disagree that's looking at it from that view.
You've been doing this for so long that you've rationalized in your head that you've worked a couple hours over here and there, and you've rationalized in your head. Each and every time you show up, you flex your hours. You don't show up to work and you say you're here. But you think that that's okay.
Well, so I'm not going to be able to convince you otherwise. But what the truth is that
I've looked at 3 months of data so far.
Okay.
And the city is not coming out ahead. You are in Virginia. You're flexing your hours. You're not here more than you're here.
I do have a question, Jason, about the DUI overtime or the OBI thing. So I understand that you work your regular shift, and then anything, and they get reimbursed for the overtime. Okay, the city does. So you say, well, I'm in my office or home, and I work 2 hours in the middle of the day dealing with the OBI task force. Okay, you could still continue on and work a total of, whether say 3 hours of DUI over OBI overtime. You can work, a 10-hour, 11-hour day, even though that time spent, just because that time is spent in the middle of the day, doesn't mean you could work. You still work the overtime in that. You understand where I'm getting at? I understand what you're saying. In the middle of the day, something pops up that you have to deal with the OBI grant. Okay, that still could be a overtime if you work the appropriate amount of hours. You work 8 hour day, then the city wouldn't be reimbursed. You see what I mean?
November 13th was the day where you texted your boss. So picking up DC personal care. Checking schedule stuff with one lingering headache. You remember that text message?
I guess.
Sure, you remember.
What you know us? I will send that because he knows everything. I wouldn't be out of state. I'm still not that.
But the bottom line is,
Unless,
well, go ahead.
I was trying to figure out what I did have. So on.
You got home at 2 in the morning up there. What's that lingering?
Okay. So I was home.
2 a.m.
So on those, really almost taking personal care for the next day.
Did you put in for personal care day?
I think I just struck it probably because
Why would you say personal care day? What? Because personal care is a specific thing. It's a specific code in your timesheet.
like I said, I was so far backed up on taking time.
That's been a reoccurring statement.
And it's true. That's why it's a recurring statement.
Is there,
to fix this, what I would implement is a more strict schedule on hours, just like you would like for a sergeant or whatever, that your window of your start time is between here and here and blah, blah, blah. And that when you got your flex time, you had to use within the same pay period. You couldn't just hold on to flex time forever. You had to use in the same pay period. And that's what I would implement, and that way that and then your schedule, instead of being told to keep it clean and keep it simple on your schedule, 844, put your actual time that you're working. No wrong.
so you're saying the lack of procedure or the lack of policy is what led to this?
For sure.
There's no policy on how you're supposed to do your overtime.
Understand no policy on how it's supposed to be hours.
You have flexible, correct?
Yeah.
And you have a policy on documenting your work time.
Work overtime. Love it.
Did you not follow the policy?
Like I said, I was given a lot of liberty to using flex time.
That's not the question he asked. Did you follow the policy, the rules? Yes or no? We didn't ask for you to cop-splain.
So there was plenty of times where I didn't.
Did you do what the policy told you to do?
I know you know the policy. I'm going to ask you some personal questions. You don't have to answer them. But how's your financial well-being right now?
Good.
Everything good? I can't hear you.
Everything's fine. There's nothing lingering problems. making ends meet. My wife works part-time, which is helpful. We're kind of empty next year almost, so the kids are kind of moved out, which is
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah.
So,
Anything else going on with?
you think that I'm working, that I'm logging hours in that aren't true hours to be able to steal from the city of Woodlands. I promise you that's not the case. I'm working a lot of hours, had more hours that I could either use in overtime or take off, and flex those hours on days. Yes, you're right. Flex hour, flex day on a holiday probably doesn't. Doesn't. What's that?
Multiple.
Yeah, it probably doesn't meet the spirit of flexing hours. Now, I wasn't told not to. I wasn't told that that was something that you couldn't do. But I understand how that looks. I'm owed an exorbitant amount of hours, and I have an opportunity to flex on a day where I know that I'm not going to have a lot of work issues because it's a holiday. Makes sense for me to flex that day.
And you can take double time on holidays, right? I think a couple of those holidays certainly adds up to 60
If I'm
hours.
here working and there's not a lot going on, so if I'm here from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. on a holiday, and there's not much going on, I'm walking around just BSing with people on a holiday.
You should be able to get plenty of work done, no?
Well, no,
You're
but
sitting in and out of your
That's the
office.
part of like being a holiday though, is that you don't have a lot of work going on at that particular time.
How
So
is it that this work that you do a lot of work, how is it that there's no work for you to do on these holidays?
I'm gonna say there's no work. You're taking my statement that I'd be walking around most of the time and saying I'm not gonna do any work.
No, you said, I'm gonna revert back to what you told us. Okay, you said when you come in here, which I actually understand that, okay, because I go through the same damn thing. All right, you say you're in the office, people are coming in and out of your office, they want to bullshit, they want to talk about, uniforms, or whatever it may be, you can't get shit done. So you work from home, okay, where you get some peace and quiet, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then now you're telling us that coming here on holiday, which would be an ideal situation to be able to tuck away and get a lot of shit done. Now you're telling me you're walking around bullshitting. Not saying I'm not putting words in your mouth. You're not getting anything done, but you're walking around bullshitting because there's not a lot going on, not a lot to do. So I mean, which one is it?
It's both. I mean, when work on a holiday, you get everything you can caught up before holidays because people are off, right? The people that you talk to for this and for that, or people are off, so you try and get as much as you can. A lot of people in the city aren't here.
Yeah,
And so what I could do on a normal work day, I can't do sometimes because of a holiday, because none of the other people in the city are even.
I see. So there's nobody to send emails to.
I'm not saying there's nobody. Well,
I don't mean it literally. I don't mean it literally.
I wouldn't be working necessarily. I wouldn't have as much workload unless I specifically planned. If I cut my workload into a point where I planned on, which could be a smarty, to come in on a holiday where I know there's not as many people here to get stuff done because it's a piece of quiet. But everybody wants to talk to you. Everybody wants to whatever when during holidays, and I don't know. I see what you're saying. It would make sense.
Well, I'm just saying you can't have it. You can't have it both ways.
Well, you can because you have a lot of work to do on a normal work day where you have people here in the city. You have this and you have that, and then on a holiday, call volumes are down. Most of the time. Nobody else in the city is here, so you spend your time on a holiday here in this position anyway, or even patrol.
We've had about 6 holidays recently. It's 96 hours since you flexed. That's well over 60. So how do you know where you're at on this so-called bank of hours?
Well, admittedly, I stopped keeping track just because it was never going down.
This guy is so full of shit, man. Unbelievable.
Is there anything that that we didn't ask that you think is crucial to the investigation?
The only thing I will add to this is that all of my evaluations have shown that even though I have a lot on my plate, I have great evaluations with I don't have a history of getting counsel for not getting my work completed or not meeting deadlines, all the things that will show that I have a lot on my plate and I'm able to get it done. Is it killing me? Is it making my blood pressure crazy and everything like that? Yes.
Are you having any issues with any of your superior officers? Is there any reason why they would have brought this to our attention? Is there some sort of malice between you guys? Is there something going on? No one has it out for you?
If there was any ever issues, I would imagine that they would bring it to me right away and say, hey, this is what we want you to do from here forward on this particular thing, and then I will 100% comply. They don't want me flexing times and putting on a holiday, which I understand. I probably wouldn't do that. If you on it now, I wouldn't do that. I would say you need to flex it. My rules would be anytime flex needs to be within that pay period. If you can't get your work all done in that pay period, you gotta take it in normal comp or overtime, and that way you can account for every pay period.
I mean, you have a policy that tells you what you do for hours worked and hours worked.
But what I was told was different. What I was told, I equated to, now that you're a lieutenant, your hours are going to be all over the place, especially with the workload that we're giving you in your position, especially taking on at least 2 people's full-time jobs. And so do what you need to do. If you need help, let me know. But like I said, I'm a police where I'm not going to come begging for help and say, hey, I can't take care of this. And in fact, it was put to me as like, hey, look, you've got a lot on your plate, but we're going to make changes in the future. They're going to help distribute this kind of stuff. There's going to be some things that we're going to do to make it better for these. This isn't permanent. So I'll do my part. Like I've always done. For the 10 years I've been here, I've always done my part. I've done so many things, volunteering hours and not putting for anything. There's an 80-20 rule where 20% does 80% of work. I'm at every function. I am organizing every special event, volunteering my time for all the heroes and helpers and shop with the cop and all the other things that we do. So I'm guilty of anything. I'm guilty of not logging my overtime the way that I should have just put in for everything during comp or informal overtime, and that way that I didn't have a flex thing of whatever. Because personally, the flex thing for me, it's just like I can't ever take the flex time. So if I have a holiday or something that's not as busy, I'm inclined to take the flex time then because it doesn't hurt me as bad on my schedule. I can actually take that day off without worrying about the schedule being a mess or something crazy happening or whatever.
In my opinion, comp time is essentially flex time. And I just can't wrap my head around how your bank is at its max limit. I can't wrap my head around.
I stopped putting time into comp. It was just using the informal flex time that I was allowed.
You don't have this problem in the private sector because in the private sector, you're not dealing with the taxpayers' money that just comes in every month, no matter what. In the private sector, if you're not producing, then the company is at risk to go out of business. And the first thing they're going to do if you're not producing is fire this guy. They're definitely not going to let him keep up with his own hours and not produce and steal from a private company.
Anything else you want to add, record? Is everything you told us true and accurate? Has anyone told you to lie to us? I'm going to conclude at 1456.
It looks like that is going to end the interrogation. What happened was he ended up resigning shortly after this interrogation while the investigation was continuing, and he took a plea deal. In that plea deal, they dropped the charge of theft in office, and he pled guilty to tampering with public records. And they gave him 6 months probation. And also, if he ever gets a job as a police officer ever again anywhere, he will be put on the Brady list. The amount of money that Swartwout stole was never released to the public. And on February 27th, 2024, Blue Ash, the city, quietly released a severance agreement, despite the fact that he stole all the money from the city. The city manager, David Walsh, signed the contract with Swartwout. It says the city will pay out Swartwout's compensatory 47.5 hours in the amount of $2,797.28. And his vacation time was 223.53 hours, and the amount of $13,163.62. Less applicable deductions the first full pay period following expiration of their revocation period in paragraph 5. Whatever that means. I read it word from word from an article I found. The city and Swartwout agreed to release each other from any claims in the future. There you go. There's no telling where he's at now, but if he gets a job as a police officer, he has to be on the Brady list. That's going to conclude the video today, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see y'all later. Make sure you're subscribed and hit the notification bell and hit that like button on your way out, ladies and gentlemen. I'll see y'all later.